Well, good morning and happy Sunday to you. We are so glad that you could join us today, whether that is in person or online. And I want to especially welcome you to our next installment of Conversations at the Cove. We decided early on that one of our main core values here at Healing Covenant Church is going to be community and conversation. And so this is just one of those ways we want to implement that so that the messages do not become just a one-way street, but that are something that we can actually share and unpack together in conversation and in relationship. So thank you for being a part of this journey. And as we enter this next week, we are continuing our series Into the Wilderness. And we're doing that in conjunction with observing this season of Lent. And whether you are Catholic or liturgical in your background or not, I truly believe that observing this season is really important to Christ followers, whatever your background, in some form or fashion. And the reason for that is Lent is meant to be a season of lament, of connecting with that wilderness experience. It's meant to be a 40-day experience where you sacrifice something that may be important to you or difficult to give up, even for 40 days. But in doing that, we are connecting with a long faith tradition that grasps the concept that wilderness seasons are part of the fabric of our faith. And without those experiences and truly understanding the purpose for them and how to live while you are in the midst of one, you really will shortchange yourself in your faith experience. We have this tendency to want our Christian faith to be something that is, God is like a vending machine and the prayers go up and the answers come down and we are happy and we love our church and we love where we live and we love our country and we love our families and we want all of those things. And yet the reality is, whether or not it's for faith purposes, life is just not like that. And if you've lived very long, you know that this is true. But what is very different for a Christ follower is that we are given a promise that God works all things together for our good and for His glory, and that in His time, even these wilderness experiences will change us, will remake us, will make us into something new and different. It will give us a deeper walk with the Lord. It will give us more profound relationships with others. It will mature us in so many ways. So we want to spend this season of Lent in a time where we are studying, doing a deep dive into the wilderness so that we can better understand those very important tenets of our faith. So last week we talked about where am I? Just the idea of when you wake up and realize you find yourself in the midst of a wilderness in your life. And this week we're going to dive into why am I here? Why am I here? And so we're not going to try to answer all of those questions, but we are going to focus on 4 specific things today that we really can connect very directly to the purpose of being in a wilderness and some things that God does in us and through us during those wilderness periods. So the first one we're going to talk about today is the heightened hearing, the heightened ability to hear God speaking to us when we are in the wilderness. I don't know if you've ever had a time when you had a big clog of wax in your ear. I know this is gross. I am someone who has this regularly. And so every so often I have to go into my doctor's office and ask them to suction it all out and clean it out. And so that I can hear better. And if you've ever had that done, you know that the first thing that happens when your ears are unplugged is a whoosh of air rushes inside that ear canal. And in an instant, your hearing is magnified. And there have been times where I lived with it that way so long that it almost hurt my eardrum to be open again because everything just sounded so loud and every tiny little sound was just very, very noticeable to my poor little ear canal. So if you've had that experience, that's very similar to what can happen when we are in the wilderness. And so when we are in this wilderness season, it's like God is trying to remove the wax from our ears, remove all of the distractions, remove everything that hinders us from truly hearing the voice of God, because He wants to be able to speak to us. I have to say, as a pastor and in the ministry, one of the most common questions I get asked or comments made is, I never feel like I hear the voice of God. Why don't I hear the voice of God? And the question I want to ask back, and there's no snarkiness meant in this at all, because I ask this of myself all the time, and that is, how much time are you actually spending trying to hear the voice of God? You see, our lives are so busy, so hectic, so complicated. We watch so much TV, we're on our phones, we're talking with other people. And the reality is, to be able to hear the voice of God, we have to actually intentionally set aside time and commit to unplugging our ears to be able to do that. And being in those wilderness seasons, that's one of the very things that God is trying to do in that time. In Job, we see this, Job 36, and we discussed last week how Job is an expert on going through a difficult time. And in Job 36, in verse 15 and 16, it says, "Hard times and trouble are God's way of getting our attention. And at this very moment, God deeply desires to lead you from trouble and to spread your table with your favorite food." You see, it's not God's intent at all to leave us in the wilderness. But while we are there, we might as well let Him do that work of opening our ears to hear Him more clearly so that this experience changes us. So as you break into your groups, I want you to ask the question and have a conversation about, do you remember any time in your life when you felt like the voice of God was a little bit louder, a little bit more clear for you? And when was that, and why do you think that was? So if any of you have that can share, or if you just want to be honest and say, I find it really difficult to hear the voice of God, listen, there's no shame in that. That is a really common human experience, as I've already mentioned. So be honest and be willing to talk with some of the folks in your group about, it's difficult for me to hear the voice of God, and let some of the others share with you their experiences and learn from each other.